Dear you, there was a time you believed love was something that arrived fully formed, something you simply had to recognize when it showed up. You believed timing would line up, effort would be mutual, and intentions would be honest because that's what people say they want. You believed that if you stayed patient enough, kind enough, open enough, love would eventually reward you. But life has a way of quietly undoing beliefs while you're busy trying to make them work. You didn't notice it at first. The way conversations became more surface level, the way excitement faded into routine explanations, the way effort slowly turned into negotiation. You told yourself it was normal, that everyone gets tired, that real love requires endurance. You learned how to excuse inconsistency by calling it complexity. You learned how to fill in silence with hope. You learned how to translate absence into potential. And somewhere along the way, you stopped asking whether you were actually being met. You started asking whether you were being unreasonable. You replayed moments in your mind, adjusting the details so they hurt less. You held on to what someone could be instead of facing who they consistently were. That's how it happens. Not all at once, but in small compromises that feel harmless in the moment. You were still functioning, still loving, still giving. From the outside, everything looked fine. But internally, something was shifting. You were becoming quieter, more observant, less reactive. You were learning the language of disappointment without realizing it had become fluent. What most people never warn you about is that life doesn't destroy love dramatically, it distracts it. Responsibilities pile up, stress enters the room, fatigue replaces curiosity, and slowly, without confrontation, love becomes something people talk about instead of practice. You watch this happen in real time. You watched attention drift. You watched presence become partial. You watched effort become conditional. You noticed how often you were explaining your feelings instead of having them understood. How often you were adjusting your expectations instead of seeing change. You noticed how rarely you were surprised in good ways anymore. And still, you stayed hopeful because hope feels safer than grief. You told yourself that every relationship has seasons, that people grow at different speeds. That understanding is the highest form of love. But understanding without reciprocity is just emotional labor, and you were doing all of it quietly. What hurt most wasn't betrayal or conflict. It was the subtle realization that you were becoming smaller in order to stay connected, that you were editing yourself for peace, that you were tolerating emotional absence because you didn't want to start over. You weren't afraid of being alone. You were afraid of admitting you already were. And that's the moment things changed internally, even if nothing changed on the surface. The moment you stopped romanticizing potential. The moment you began observing patterns instead of promises. The moment you realized love doesn't need constant translation. Dear, there's a quiet kind of grief that comes from realizing you've been emotionally present in places where you weren't fully received. It doesn't scream, it doesn't explode, it settles. It teaches you restraint. You learn to sit with unanswered questions. You learn to stop chasing clarity from people who benefited from confusion. You noticed how calm you became when you stopped expecting consistency from inconsistency. How grounded you felt when you stopped explaining yourself. How powerful it felt to listen instead of persuade. You weren't hardened, you were clearer, and clarity changes everything. It shows you that love isn't supposed to leave you guessing where you stand. It shows you that effort shouldn't feel like persuasion. It shows you that connection doesn't require self-abandonment. You began to recognize when someone was emotionally available versus emotionally interested. There's a difference, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. You didn't announce this shift. You didn't dramatize it. You simply moved differently. You listened more. You reacted less. You stopped chasing reassurance. And that's when people began responding differently too. Some leaned in, others disappeared. Both responses told you everything you needed to know. Dear you, being seen isn't about being admired. It's about being recognized without performance. It's about being understood without explanation. And for the first time, you stopped trying to earn that visibility. You allowed yourself to be exactly as you were, observant, measured, grounded. You realized that the right connections don't require shrinking or stretching. They don't confuse peace with boredom. They don't make you question your worth during moments of silence. Being seen feels calm. It feels safe. It feels mutual. And you didn't lose love when you stopped forcing it. You found yourself. And that changed everything. There's